While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season, literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Reaching out to you, one of 50 million Christ followers in America who are approaching or already in retirement. We want to help you and us really embrace the calling that God's been preparing for you all of your life. Jesus said that He came that you might have life and live it to the fullest, and that includes your retirement years. You've tuned into I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. We're your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and we're right alongside of us is Bruce Bruinsma, the founder of the Retirement Reformation. Check them out online, retirementreformation.org, retirementreformation.org.
Listeners, we are excited for the opportunity to be able to present so many things to you in today's show. And one of them I just want to remind you is that on the contact page of the website, retirementreformation.org, we would love to hear your retirement reformation story, what God's been doing in your life that, or maybe He's shown you, or an experience you've had. Just share with us what is happening in your life, and you may be one that is going to win a copy of the book Retirement Reformation. Maybe you've already read it and you need to share it with a friend. That's an opportunity that you can have as well. But that is something I want to make sure that you know, that we want to hear from you. We want to know what God is doing. And also, one of the things I'm excited about for today's show is I love to discover things about myself. I love to learn how God created me, because without some of the things that we're going to talk about today, a lot of us would drift. We would drift through life. We would just kind of, coast along. So hang on tight, listen, lean in, and I know you're going to get something out of today.
And that's what's amazing. God gave each one of us a unique set of gifts, talents, and abilities. How are you using those gifts, talents, and abilities in your retirement years? Well, when you start charting that course for what those 30 years would look like, we had to bring Bruce Bruinsma back here in order to figure out, how do we get this done? How do we discover our gifts, talents, and abilities? And he talks about it in his brand new book, Charting Your Course. Hey, planning out the next 30 I keep saying it, 30 years or 3 decades. It's not 30 decades, but if you get to live that long, that would be awesome. Bruce Bruinsma, welcome back to I Retire for Him.
Glad to be here. Glad to have this topic on the table today. Mm-hmm. The process of discovering who we are and then finding what is true about our lives, so that as we approach different situations, we're not surprised about how we respond, and also can call upon the strengths that God has given us to have the greatest impact where there is the greatest need.
So Bruce, you've been studying yourself, because when you write a book like Charting Your Course, you've got to figure out, okay, well, if I'm going to ask other people to do this, of course I got to do it for myself. So who did God create you to be? Well, who are you?
There are so many different elements that make up our personalities. Matter of fact, when I was in graduate school, my graduate thesis was figuring out what were the personalities for a given store and whether it was appropriate for that store to be in that specific location. Well, I think it plays out in exactly the what we have here. When I did that survey, we found that there were 7 different characteristics that were important for people that would be attracted to that store. And then we had to match up those individual personality traits of the store, characteristics, with the marketplace and be able to come to conclusion. This is very, very similar in that we have so many different parts of us. We have, our spiritual gifts. So understanding what in the world those are. We've got our personality assessment. How do we respond to things? We have our money personalities. How do we deal with money? And then we have the, how do we simply respond in different circumstances? So let me just take two of those as an example for myself. One is the DISC system. And Jim and I were just chatting. And two of those characteristics are dominance and I stands for
drawing a blank.
Illuminating, illustrious.
Yeah, it's the
Jim's gonna look it up.
Interactive.
Okay.
And so between those two personality types of someone who is most comfortable in a social setting and being encouraging and interacting with people.
That's an influencer.
Influencer,
Really,
that's the word I wanted.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. An influencer, and to be able to be in that environment. However, I know that in times of stress, when there's some major catastrophe happens or some big deal goes on, I switch into that dominance mode where I'm not particularly understanding, I'm very directive. Here's what we need to do, and here's how we need to do it, and let's quit talking about it and get going. And so I know that when I'm under stress, that's going to be my reaction. Now, if we're in an automobile accident or there's the water pipes break, wow, what a wonderful personality that is to have somebody in charge who says, all right, let's quit talking. Here's what we got to do.
Yep.
On the other hand, that is not good when you're trying to encourage someone in their own personal journey. And so those are the dynamics in my life that I play with. Then secondly, there's a whole characteristic, perhaps many of you have heard of the 5 love languages, but I'm going to talk about something parallel to that. It's called the 5 money personalities. We know that even though money is not the most important thing, 70% of divorces have money as a major component. And so Scott and Bethany Palmer, in creating their role as the money couple in creating the 5 money personalities, in looking for ways to be able to people connect about the money issue, not about how much, not how to invest it, not how to save it, but just simply how to talk about it. And when of those 5 money personalities, often people marry their opposites, and it's easy to see why they, in fact, their primary and secondary personalities, why the conflicts are there. On the other hand,
So which one are you, the spender or the saver?
Interestingly enough, you have 2 money personalities. I'm a risk taker, saver. I'm a risk taker,
which that
saver.
seems an oxymoron there, but
It does, and so those dynamic tensions are always there. So the way that plays itself out is I'm willing to take a risk, but I'm going to evaluate it pretty closely, and then I'm going to take it. But I'm going to evaluate it so I understand it when I go forward.
What does all of this have to do with reforming retirement in America?
It all has to do with that because it informs how it is that we are going to act as a result of the transformation of our minds. And so when our minds are being transformed to follow Christ, to get an understanding of, oh my goodness, there's more to do, that in fact those action steps need to be informed by who we are. And thank goodness, thank God that we have that opportunity to understand who we are.
Yeah.
It's so powerful. And we're going to have lots more with Bruce Bruinsma as we talk today literally about who are we? I mean, these tests, I mean, who are you? And what have you done with my wife? No, it's seriously just, it's so important that we understand who God created us to be so that in retirement we can execute based on the calling he has on our life. You're listening to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation right here in the United States of America. And we'll be right back.
You've spent decades making financial plans for your retirement years. But have you done any life planning? God has a plan for your life, and it includes living out your faith in your retirement years with meaning, purpose, and intentionality. Go out to retirementreformation.org and click on our Resources tab. Download a copy of the book, Charting Your Course, and get started with life planning today. Simply download a copy of Charting Your Course at retirementreformation.org. Make the journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Now let's get back to the show.
Welcome back to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. We're your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and we are joined today by the founder, Bruce Bruinsma, of the Retirement Reformation. Bruce, you have a guest for us today.
Jim, I do.
And he's not only a guest, but he's a friend. So I'd like to introduce you to someone who weighs about what I do, is about the height that I am, and he just tells better stories than I do. And so I'd like to have you meet Don UNREIN. Don, welcome. We're glad to have you here, my friend.
Glad to be here.
Just
Don,
to give you a
glad
little
to have
background on Don before we get into the dialogue is, Don was just look at him. So he was a football player, he was a basketball player, spent then 15 years in the Army. And he was a master sergeant. So I always knew I never wanted to mess with him. So he was a master sergeant in the Army for 15 years and finished it out in the National Guard with another 5. But then what was fascinating is God called him and he became the chef at Ponderosa Christian Camp. And he was the chef there for 19 years. And it was at the end of that period of time that Don and I met. And so Don, after 15 years in the Army, all over the world, 19 years as a chef working with kids and feeding 100, 200, 300, 400 people. And then it came to that point of retirement. And so what kind of went through your mind as you were thinking about that transition?
Well, a lot of things, just the main thing to trust God, because I didn't know what I was going to do, how we were going to do it, where we were going to live. And the thing I learned the most, to trust in God, that we have a God that is so faithful, that loves us so much. And I don't want to get emotional.
Well, while you're doing that, just to, during that 19 years, he also spent a number of years as a youth pastor at the local church. And so he was working with kids at camp and he was working with kids at church. And so this whole idea of retirement, what did that mean to you? And then in this period of time while you're transitioning to whatever's next, what is God having you doing and what are you doing? Just talk to us about this transition to retirement.
Well, it's really been, I think the best word for it is a sabbatical. I was kind of burned out. I gave 200%. That's just how I'm wired. And so, the Army and that was just a big toll on my mind and my body and family. And so God just has me chilling now, just spending time with him.
Well, talk to me about what's kind of a normal day for you as you connect with God and what else has he's got you doing? And I'm going to ask you about a conversation you had this morning a little bit later. But so what has he got you doing on a daily basis?
Well, I get up and a lot of times I'll make my wife breakfast, cooking me. And I usually don't eat as early. I try to wait a little while. And so I do a few devotionals. I have iDisciple on my phone, and I have four devotionals that I do there every day. And then sometimes I tell people this, they don't even believe you do that many devotionals. I have the time to do it now. I do the Daily Bread one, and then I have my Bible reading where I'm reading through the Bible in 1 year. So, and then a lot of that time is in prayer, in between the devotionals, when I read something, then it takes me into prayer. So I've been praying probably more in my whole life, praying for all my family and friends for their protection during this COVID thing. And so been spending a lot of time in prayer.
One of the things we talk about in the Retirement Reformation is that one of the benefits that comes as a result of what the world calls retirement is in fact that opportunity to grow closer to God, to grow with emotional maturity and in that spiritual maturity. And so I know that you've just embraced that spiritual side in a big, big way. But while you're doing quote unquote nothing in your sabbatical, he's also got you talking to some people. And we were sharing earlier this morning about a conversation that you was able to have with an old Army buddy this morning. Just tell us briefly about that.
Yes, I had a buddy. He called me to tell me that we lost one of our guys that we served with, passed away today. And we talked. I'm his mentor. We were roommates in the Army, and I was always telling him about Jesus, and he got out way before me. And so we lost contact with each other for 30 years, and we reconnected on Facebook. And it was just amazing. And he's been through all kinds of things. He has diabetes. He has kidney failure. And so he does dialysis every day. And so I just try every week to call him, text him to encourage him and lift him up in prayer and just let him know that somebody cares about him. I send him money sometimes. He just lost his wife. It sounds like a sad story, but it's the truth, and it's just crazy. He lost his water heater the other day, broke, and he didn't have money to fix it. So Marty and I sent him some money. That's what we believe in giving like that. So
sometimes we wonder about the time after we retire when we do that transition and say, how's God going to use us? And often he surprises us on how he has already prepared us to be used. And I think you're just an absolutely great example of that. So at this moment, if I said to you, what are you going to do next? What are you going to say to me?
Next today?
Next in what God's got planned for you.
Well, I have lots of opportunities, and I'm just praying that God will open a door and show me. And I'm being very careful. I'm no hurry. And I feel God doesn't want me to hurry. And I know whatever he has me do, that he'll prepare me and give me the gifts and the skills to do it, because he always has all my life. I jumped into being a chef and was not a chef. Became one after the fact. So God is a great God that wherever he leads us, he provides us.
Well, one of the things I can guarantee you two things as we close this section, this session. Number one, he is a great chef. And his only problem is he doesn't know how to cook for 2 or 3 people. So there's always extra, and how wonderful that is. And I think as an affirmation for so many that may be listening to us, that there is that time of sabbatical. And it may come more than once during this 30 years of retirement. But God does have a plan, and to be patient and to wait upon him, and to take that opportunity to respond as he provides opportunities and to grow spiritually. I think you're just a great example of that, Don, and we're just so pleased that you're able to be part of this broadcast. So thank you.
And Bruce, I want to jump in because, when Martha and I were there with you in Colorado Springs, we got to stay with you and we get to experience some of Don and Marty's cooking, and off the charts. I'm coming back. I can tell you that much. I'm coming back. But Don, you and I had a chance to talk, and I just wanted to let me just chime in here for a second. I know one thing the Lord wants you to do. Let me just remind you, because he told me when we were together, you need to write a book, my friend. You've got stories that the world needs to hear, incredible faith stories. You need to write that book, and we'll be right back with more of I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation with founder Bruce Bruinsma. Thank you, Don UNREIN, for being on the show with us today, for sharing your story. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We'll be right back. We'll be right back.
It's time we stop looking at our retirement years as 30 years of vacation, leisure, and self-gratification. Let's take control of our retirement life plan and build meaning, purpose, and intentionality into it. Go to retirementreformation.org and click on the word manifesto. We invite you to make a retirement declaration to yourself and to God. Sign the manifesto and start changing the way you think about retirement. retirementreformation.org. Click on Manifesto. Journey from retirement to reformation, so you can say, I retire for him. Now let's get back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. We are your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberger. We've got the founder of the Retirement Reformation right here in the studio with us today, Bruce Bruinsma. Bruce, I love the DISC profile, the 5 languages, the money languages. What happens when you get a group of retirees together and you have them go through these exercises and they start to find out things about themselves? What's it like in the room?
It is one of two things, Jim. It's really fascinating. It is either very, very quiet, or it's very excited. And often it is done in that sequence, because the first times as you discover about yourselves, and then it dawns on you how this plays into what is going to be the next 30 years of your life, it's a little It's awesome. It's inspiring, but it's also a little scary.
A little overwhelming.
A little overwhelming, and you need to take a little time to be able to take it in, to breathe in, and to go, oh, okay. And then the next step that happens, or the next activity that happens with that understanding, is an excitement, because you know that there is an open door in front of you, even though it may not be clear yet exactly what it is. But you know that there is one, and that in fact you are in the process of taking the steps that will bring you to that next stage.
I can imagine when, you think about the solemn side of it, when people are kind of like, wow, I didn't know this about myself. It'd be very easy to go down almost a road of regret, because I know we've had things in our life, Jim, where we've said, man, if I'd have known this 30 years about myself, we'd have probably had a few less arguments along the way.
The whole love and respect thing. That was a huge one for us.
Yes. So, but being able to turn that and say, now what can we do with it? And then the excitement can build, and it can build upon what we've talked about in previous shows about, knowing what your mission and vision is going to be for your future. So, listeners, this is a great opportunity for you to look up the book Charting Your Course on the website retirementreformation.org. And really, this is not about selling the books. It's about changing people's hearts, helping people to understand that there's so much more ahead, especially if there's a plan, especially if you're seeking out and saying, God, what do you have for me, and how can I do this well, so that we don't get to the end and then live in a time of regret.
And for most of us, for those of us who are married, that it is a journey that both of us will be going into and continuing together. So one of the other things, Jim, you asked what happens in the room. Typically, if you have couples, they're looking over each other's shoulders, and they're looking to see what the results were.
Yeah.
And then the conversation is, oh, that explains why you... whatever it may be.
Yeah, but how sad it is that they live 2/3 of their life and they're just finding this stuff out. But how great it is that they're heading into retirement with a whole lot better platform, a whole lot better basis for understanding.
Yeah.
It was interesting when Judy and I first began this journey, which is a large number of years ago, but in understanding, who we are, when we did the money personality profiles, and both of us are savers. Okay. However, she's a security seeker saver, and I'm a risk taker saver. Okay, so we have that similarity together. What we learned was that even though we had many similarities, there was a dynamic tension, and we tend to polarize over that. And even though we're both savers, I'm careful. She's a security seeker. When I would take the risk taker part, my goodness, she would see that as, oh dear, what in the world is he doing? And when her security seeker would come to the front, it would inform my conversation, oh, geez, she's just being a wet blanket in doing that. And once we learned that those were our personalities, the quality of our conversation about the present, the past, and the future was dynamically impacted.
And people can find out more about the money personalities on themoneycouple.com, right?
That's correct.
But how cool would it be? Because so many retired couples, the focus is on money. Because they're worried, do I have enough? Is what we have going to make it? What we have with, some people retiring today even still have pensions. But most of us, when we retire, are not going to have pensions. But you got your pension, you got Social Security, and what other savings you may have. Is it going to be enough? But understanding your money personality actually helps you work through some of those issues. That really transforms what retirement looks like, doesn't it?
It adds that dimension around the conversation of do you have enough? And we know that the answer to that question is very specific. And you need, in fact, to be able to deal with what is true in your life financially. But then understanding how you see it and how your spouse sees it gives you the opportunity to both understand it, to be able to work with it, make changes if that's necessary, and to appreciate what resources God has given us, and then how to steward them even better.
So we've talked about a lot of different assessments that are available and things that you help us walk through in Charting Your Course, the book that we're discussing. But, let's talk about the spiritual assessments, because when we learn as Jesus followers how God has gifted us, then it helps us to understand the impact that we can have in our retirement. So talk about that. How do we use that to learn how to serve?
The thing that was always the most interesting to me was not the similarities between our spiritual assessments and our natural gifts, but the places where, in fact, they are different, where they are either enhanced or a new gift starts to appear that you will use. And understanding that, to know that I have the gift of preaching, to know that I have the gift of stewardship, to know that I have those gifts gives me encouragement when I see the opportunities that God puts in front of me, and then I can see how that spiritual gifts is already what he has planned for me to use them in that context. What an affirmation. And again, I keep going back to joy and freedom.
Right.
But what a relief to know that in the opportunity to be able to speak to Christ about someone, I don't have to be worried that I'm not going to be able to do it. But I know that in God's power, he will give me the words, and that is the spiritual gift that he's given me, and I can be free to do it. So instead of apprehensive, scared, hesitant, I can speak into it, and I can do it with confidence, because that's what Christ told me. I will give you the confidence to be able to represent me.
And it's really all about not just living, but living a life that will have meaning and purpose. And understanding ourselves helps get us there. Bruce Bruinsma with the Retirement Reformation, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Good to be with you as always.
Check them out online, retirementreformation.org. Lots of great resources for all of you out there. You've been listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, with your host, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and Retirement Reformation's only Bruce Bruinsma. We're Christ followers pursuing purpose in our retirement. So ultimately, I retire for him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and Retirement Reformation founder, Bruce Bruinsma. I Retire for Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.